wanted to do today was to talk about spiritual bypassing and self-sabotage, specifically in terms of the seeker's journey. However, most of this can be applied into any other area of your life as well. Spiritual bypassing, the most basic definition of spiritual bypassing is you're avoiding the issues that need to be resolved, like unresolved trauma, grief, or whatever it is that stops you from being who you actually truly are. Life's a mess, as no doubt is for most people who decide to go down this journey. In my own case, it was the breakup of a relationship, and we don't seem to understand why things are happening the way they're happening. Along the way, the idea of enlightenment comes along, and you excitedly read up about it, and you realize that this is the answer to all your dreams. If only you could just wake up. So then you start the journey, you take on a teacher, or you take on a method, you start practicing different healing modalities, because you're going to get enlightened, and you're going to get to this land where everything's milk and honey, and everything's going to be absolutely fine. The flaw with that is that this whole wanting to get enlightened implies that there's something missing, and that if only that thing can be understood or resolved, that life will go back to this sense of wholeness. The other problem also as well is that with the whole mystique of enlightenment and what have you, most of us don't really believe we're going to wake up anyway. So we self-sabotage our efforts by the very being in meetings, the very reading about this, the very trying to figure this out using something as limited as the mind. Bring then into the mix the whole idea of spiritual bypassing, and things get really exciting. I've been quoting for the last couple of months in my articles and in videos the Rumi quote, "The wound is where the light enters." And the wound, as I've identified in an article that I wrote on my website called The Inner Journey, can sometimes be that failed relationship, that financial issue, that unresolved grief over the death of a parent or of someone near. It can be that weight issue. It can be any number of issues that when we hear about this whole idea of realization, and that how realization, as I said, is this land of milk and honey and everything will magically become beautiful, we then bypass the actual issue that would help us wake up to our true reality and start chasing an image that is limited and it's in our mind as to what enlightenment is. Now, over time, what happens is the issue that would provide you a way inwards is still there. And if we resist it, it persists. And if we ignore it, well, it's not going anywhere. It's still going to be there. So over time, that issue can still be there, working away in the background to sabotage any efforts you're trying to make anyway to wake up to your true nature, or any efforts you're trying to make to try and improve your life in any way, shape, or form. And bypassing, which is something that we're all engaged in, is really quite terrible in a technique to be using, or quite terrible a thing to be doing if you want to wake up, because you're missing the glaringly obvious. And the glaringly obvious is that which got you into this is the very thing that's going to free you. So, for example, my own journey started with the breakup of a relationship and the death of my father. And as I've said in previous articles, I feel that had I been strong enough at that moment in time, or had I really authentically looked at the situation and realized that what was really causing the pain and the agitation in my life was the breakup of a relationship that I thought would last forever, or that I wasn't dealing adequately with the death of my father, then I may not have taken this long protracted route to enlightenment. And it may have been that that which was holding me back could have been resolved in such a quick time. And I could have just got back on with my life. Instead, like most people, hearing this thing called enlightenment became my ultimate spiritual bypass. And rather than taking responsibility for the mess that my life was, I decided that no, it was a nobler and loftier pursuit for me to wake up, which is just code for saying I'm frightened, I'm terrified, and I really don't want to deal with the elephant in the room. And it's incredible the amount of people who are going down this route. Now, when you go down this route, you're also engaging in self-sabotage, and it's subtle, because if you're not going to take responsibility for your life, then do you honestly think you're going to take responsibility for waking up or going free and everything that that entails? You know, the thing I found is, after taking this long protracted route to finally realizing who I was, I found that there were several issues I was avoiding, and one of them was about growing up. One of them was about taking responsibility for my life and dealing with my personal relationships, dealing with my financial affairs, which were decimated because I spent a majority of my working life looking for something and never really built anything. And what I found is, I'm only really starting to live life now. Now, what's really interesting about that is that in living life now, I found that it's affected how I talk about self-realization, in the sense that a lot of the terminology has been dropped, and I'm starting to realize that, and I've said this at talks myself, that a lot of these videos, a lot of these talks, a lot of these writings are contributing to the problem. And if you could see that, then you could make this the last video you ever watch, or you could make this the last talk you ever go to, or the last reading. But because we have this body of knowledge, we've invested in it, and it brings us some sort of idea of comfort and safety, which is illusory at best, because those issues are still there. What we find is, we don't want to let go of this security blanket of seeking, because it gives us an identity. It also allows us to feel like we matter. I think if I had £1 for every time I've heard, spiritual arrogance at my talks, I think I'd be very rich, as I tend to say, whereby sometimes as people are trying to wake up, they become very judgmental, and they've become very arrogant in the sense that they feel that because they're pursuing this noble, lofty idea of realizing who they truly are, that they are so much better than that person who's just getting on with their life. And yet the funny thing is, if we were given the chance, I feel that most of us would swap places eagerly. It also leads me to a point I've been making in a lot of talks of mine about the relationship that started me on this journey. And as I stated, when I had my heart broken, instead of dealing with the issue, I chose to bypass it, possibly unconsciously at the time, because I wasn't aware of anything called spiritual bypassing. But it's amazing how naturally it comes up in us, and I believe that's more to do with our conditioned responses of fight or flight. But in this case, I chose to flight very quickly, as opposed to actually address the issue. What I always say is that wisdom was greater than mine, because she dealt with what was going on and lived her life and made no mistakes about it. I feel sometimes within the spiritual community there is this arrogance, and also this so-called perfectionism as well, of once everything makes sense, I will then go and live my life. And that, to me, as I've just said, is code for I just don't want to take responsibility for the mess that my life is in. And yet that mess, that horrible, disgusting, I want to keep away from it mess, offers us the greatest opportunity to realize ourselves. To quote Rumi again, the wound is where the light enters. And if we could take our time with it, because what I find is a lot of seekers, when they come into talks, they're very desperate, so they have very short timelines. And what I mean by that is their attention span is short, because all they want to hear is how to wake up. And for those people who are harping on about it's here and now, it's here and now, it's here and now, there tends to be a bit of a process, and the process scares them. And for those who are going on about I've journeyed 20, 30 years or so, it tends to be really about bringing them into focus and showing them that it is really just this and here and now. But to go back to this whole idea of, oh, it's all here and now, here and now, here and now, what you find is when a person comes to a talk and there's that desperation to wake up, but upon examining what's going on, you realize that they're feeling that waking up will sort out their lives, or sort out their financial issues, or sort out their relationship issues. You'll also find that that person isn't really listening to you, because they're listening out for the wrong things. They just want to know how to wake up, because they just don't want to deal with the issue. All that pain is becoming very, very agitating, and rather than moving away from the pain, let us move into the pain. Let us move into the wound. and let us deal with those issues. You know, if it's a financial issue, slowly but surely take your time, feel that fear, open up that bank statement. If it's a relationship issue and you're hurting, slowly but surely go into the hurt. And what you may find is that wound that Rumi stated is very similar to the barriers that he stated in another quote, where he said that your task is not to seek for love. So your task in this instance is not to seek for realization. Realization is your true nature, but instead to eliminate that which is in front of this realization. And that is the mess that most of us try to bypass, believing that miraculously getting to the Holy Land, this land of milk and honey, will make those things go away. As I said, my first memory after the idea of seeking disappeared was seeing this cockroach and thinking, well, this isn't meant to happen. As if somehow magically everything would just make sense. The true magic, if that's what you're looking for, is in dealing with the issues, is in growing as a person, is in becoming stronger and braver. I am doing things that I could never have imagined. I have an incredibly amazing life. I feel very blessed. I'm truly grateful for what's going on. And that's because I've had many dark nights of the soul. I've had many issues that have come up, and I've found over time that the quickest way is to actually deal with the elephant in the room. So most people, if you're really honest with yourself, you know why you're sitting in that room. And if you would be honest with yourself, as I say to people, the lies we tell other people are bad, but the lies we tell ourselves are brutal. If we were to be honest with ourselves and identify the actual issue as to why we are sitting in those rooms, that wound, that barrier, and by eliminating that barrier we could see our true nature. This is probably the fastest way you will ever see, rather than believing that by waiting for this event which you don't really want. Because if you're really honest about it, letting go of your ideas and your stories and everything leaves you with no excuses, and it leaves you in a place of 100% responsibility. And sometimes these rooms, these satsangs, are so enticing and so lovely that what's better than what we've got, which is why I feel the hordes of seekers are growing exponentially year in, year out. And yet simultaneously we have an explosion in mental health issues, we have an explosion in depression, in anxiety, and in panic attacks. I was talking to an ambulance driver the other day, and he was actually telling me that during this coronavirus pandemic, a majority of the time what they're being called out for is anxiety and panic attacks. And add to the mix Google, which everybody then goes on to and starts believing that they've got cancer or they're going to die. What we find is we're constantly looking outside ourselves, and that's causing these agitation. And our bodies are now reacting, our environment is being changed, and the wound is gaping. And yet we believe that if we do not address the wound and we instead go for the land of milk and honey, that somehow everything will be okay, and nothing can be further from the truth. It is just this. It is this moment happening right now. Whether that moment is blissful or whether that moment is uncomfortable, it is now. And instead of trying to believe that by bypassing it's over there, and talking and waxing lyrical about it just being this moment, why don't we just come into the moment now? And whatever is coming up is what needs to be dealt with. It's what needs to be observed. It's what needs to be witnessed. And then it's what needs to be united with in order to destroy the duality that exists in the other and in yourself. So the issue is not separate from you. In that acceptance, it is transformative. And in that acceptance, the duality that exists is transformed into this oneness, and we recognize that oneness as us. So I hope the video has provided some food for thought, and instead of the conditioned response that no doubt people will have to this, or no doubt you are having to listening to this, can we stop? Can we be honest? And can we identify what it is that has us watching this video has us coming to these talks or reading about this realization, are we truly wanting to be free, or are we truly avoiding some pain? And if we are avoiding some pain, can we identify what that pain is? And can we sit with that pain? Can we finally be free of it? As I said in previously, and I've said in articles as well, had I at that time sat there and grieved my father, had I at that time grieved for a loss of a relationship that I thought would last forever, would I have taken this journey? And the beautiful thing is, after all of these years, I can now, unequivocally say, I don't think I would have taken this journey. I don't think I would be here. I think I would have possibly been a braver, wiser person. As I say, I had my heart broken, and I decided to go around the world and look for this thing called enlightenment. And the woman who broke my heart just got on with her life, and had some beautiful children, was in this loving marriage that broke up. Then she found someone else. Do I feel that with everything that I know, that my wisdom was greater than hers? And I would always say no, because she lived life and I bypassed life. And in seeing that, I'm now living life. I'm now taking responsibility. And sometimes responsibility can be a scary place. But if we can take responsibility for who we truly are by being honest, we may find that we become wiser, braver, more vulnerable, more powerful, more honest people. So let's address the elephant in the room. Why are you here? What is your purpose for being in these rooms? What do you really want? And in identifying that, if we can sit with that wound, we may find that as the light enters, all that's illuminated is who we truly are.